There is a town in Australia that no longer exists. Not abandoned, not crumbling, gone. In 1983, the entire place was put up for auction, and buyers walked away with the houses, the streets, the streetlights, the pool, the school, carting them off piece by piece until nothing was left but empty concrete slabs and roads leading to nowhere. Stay with us until the end, because that town is number one on this list, and its story is the strangest thing that has ever happened to an Australian community. Queensland is a state built on booms, gold, copper, uranium, coal, tin. Every one of those booms left behind a town, and almost every one of those towns eventually got left behind in return. Some sit on national parkland now, protected but untouchable, the kind of place you can walk through but never own. Others sit right next to towns that are still very much alive, where a residential block can run you less than the price of a used car back in the city. Today, we're counting down 10 of these Queensland ghost towns, from remote goldfields reachable only by four-wheel drive to a town that got sold for parts. By the end, you'll understand something strange about how quickly a boom can turn into silence, and why the cheapest land in this country often comes with the heaviest history attached to it. And hey, if you're the kind of person who likes discovering the places most Australians have never heard of, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because we're about to get into some genuinely wild stories. While you're at it, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching this from. We've had viewers from 6 continents on this channel, and it's always interesting to see how far these stories travel. Let's start at number 10. Number 10. Paradise. Somewhere beneath the still water of the Paradise Dam in Queensland's North Burnett region lies a town that no living person has ever set foot in as a ruin. Paradise was a gold rush township established in the early 1890s to service 2 nearby gold fields, Paradise and Mount Shamrock. For a few short years, it had all the trappings of a real Queensland town: a courthouse, a hotel, a school, Chinese market gardens supplying fresh produce to hungry miners. Then, less than a decade after it began, the gold ran out. By 1898, the town was abandoned outright. For over a century afterward, its cemetery sat quietly in the bush northeast of Biggendon, the only visible trace that people had ever lived, worked, and died there. Then, decades later, engineers built a dam on the same site to secure water for the region, and the old town site of Paradise disappeared beneath the surface for good. Somewhere under that water are the footings of a settlement that vanished twice, once when the miners left, and once when the water rose. Paradise sits within the dam catchment now, so there is nothing to buy here. But the region around it, the North Burnett, remains one of the most affordable rural pockets in the state. And if you think losing a town to abandonment is strange, wait until you hear how one town in the far north lost its people to a copper price crash that happened almost overnight. Number 9. Innisley. In 1866, the government geologist Richard Daintree found copper along a remote river junction in what's now the Etheridge Shire, far northwest of Cairns. It was too isolated to work profitably, and after Daintree died in 1878, the exact location of his find was essentially lost to history. It sat forgotten for over 20 years. Then, around 1899, renewed interest in copper and railways brought prospectors back to the same stretch of river, and this time, they didn't let it go. A township sprang up on the banks of the Copperfield River, originally called Copperfield itself, before being formally surveyed as Innisley in 1900. For a few years, while the Chillago Company built a railway line through the district between 1907 and 1910, Innisley was actually the largest population center in the entire Shire, bigger than the administrative seat itself. Hotels, a billiard room, a bakery, a butcher, all built to serve miners who had come chasing a deposit that had already been lost once. It didn't last. The mine closed in 1922 when the ore ran out and copper prices collapsed after the war. Today, the 2021 census recorded exactly 87 people living across the entire Ainslie locality, an area larger than 4,000 square kilometers. What remains is the old two-story Ainslie Hotel, still serving drinks, the ruins of the smelter and its slag dump, and Copperfield Gorge, a swimming hole cut into the same rock that once yielded the ore that built the town twice over. From a copper boom nobody remembers to a copper boom that got renamed out of fear, our next stop tells one of the strangest naming stories in all of Australian mining history. Number 8. Kurradala. Copper was first discovered here in 1884, about 65 kilometers south of Cloncurry in the state's far northwest. But it took over 2 decades and a spike in world copper prices before anyone seriously developed it. When the township was surveyed around 1910, it was named Hompton after the mining company. Soon after, thanks to a large influx of German miners, locals started calling it Friesland instead. Then came the First World War, and a German-sounding name became a liability nobody wanted attached to their town. In October 1916, the settlement was renamed one final time to Kurradala, an Aboriginal word believed to mean eagle hawk. By 1913, Friesland, as it was still known then, had roughly 1,500 residents and 6 hotels, 5 stores, several dance halls, and even a cinema. The smelter here worked overtime supplying copper to the British war effort, and the company paid out enormous dividends between 1915 and 1918. Then the war ended, copper prices crashed in 1920, and the town's population halved within a single year. The hospital, the picture theater, and the courthouse were later dismantled and physically moved to the new mining boomtown of Mount Isa. Today, Kurradala's cemetery holds more than 360 graves, far more people than currently live anywhere near the site. The chimney stacks of the old Hampton smelter still stand against the horizon, visible long before you reach what's left of the town itself. Kurradala's story is one of a name erased by wartime prejudice. Our next entry tells the story of a boomtown that was erased by nothing more complicated than a political scandal. Number 7. Chillagoe and Mungana. In 1901, a railway line reached Chillagoe in far north Queensland, and almost overnight, one of the most ambitious smelting operations in the state's history came to life. At its peak, the Chillagoe Company's mines, railway, and smelters employed close to 1,000 people, processing copper, lead, silver, and gold hauled in from small satellite mining camps across the district, including the nearby township of Mungana. The smelters kept running through booms and shutdowns until 1943. But it's what happened in between that makes this entry different from a simple mining story. In 1919, ownership of the struggling smelters passed to the Queensland government, and within a few years, rumors began swirling about corrupt dealings between mine owners, a mining warden, and senior state politicians. The controversy became known as the Mungana Affair, and in 1929, a Royal Commission investigation into it ended the political careers of 2 former Queensland premiers. The same corporate structure that ran Chillagoe also owned the Mount Mulligan coal mine, which supplied fuel for its operations, a connection that becomes darker the moment you learn what happened at Mount Mulligan itself. Today, the ruins of the Chillagoe smelters sit inside a national park, a towering chimney stack, and a black slag heap standing over what locals now call a post-industrial ghost town. A few hundred people still live in the modern township nearby. and the district is better known today for its spectacular limestone cave systems than for the political scandal it once caused in Brisbane. Speaking of political influence, if this video has already surprised you once, imagine what happens when we reach the town that was once the fourth largest in the entire state. Number 6. Croydon. In 1885, gold was discovered on Croydon Downs Station, and by most accounts, the credit goes to a station worker nicknamed Post Hole Tom, who is said to have struck gold while sinking a fence post hole. Within 2 years, the rush that followed had turned an empty patch of savanna into a town of 7,000 people, making Croydon, for a brief moment, the fourth largest town in the entire state of Queensland. By 1897, it still ranked third in population across the whole of North Queensland, behind only Charters Towers and Townsville. Between 1890 and 1910, gold output from Croydon's reefs was second only to Charters Towers as well. The town had 4 separate newspapers running at once and 11 share brokers working the boom. 36 hotels once operated here. Then, as with almost every gold town on this list, the ore quality started declining after 1900, and by 1914, less than 30 years after the rush began, Croydon's population had already been cut in half. By 1926, the mining warden packed up and left, because there simply weren't enough working miners left to justify the position. Today, Croydon's population sits at roughly 300 people, and only one of those original 36 hotels, the Club Hotel, built around 1887, is still pouring drinks. The old railway that was built to serve the gold rush survives today as the Gulflander, a heritage tourist train that still runs the same line. From a town that briefly outranked most of the state, we move to the town that shows exactly why real estate in this part of Queensland is cheap enough to raise eyebrows, and why most of the towns on this list can't actually be bought at all. Number 5. Georgetown. Here's the thing about most of the ghost towns on this list: Maytown, Curadala, Paradise, Mount Mulligan. These places sit on Crown land, National Park Estate, or dam catchments now. You can visit them, in some cases only by 4-wheel drive, but you cannot buy a single square meter of them. Georgetown is different because Georgetown never actually died. Founded in 1869 as an alluvial gold mining center along the Etheridge River, the town was named after local gold commissioner Howard St. George, and at its peak, it drew a rush of roughly 3,000 prospectors chasing the same seams that made this district, for a time, the second most productive goldfield in Queensland after Charters Towers. Most of those prospectors eventually moved on to richer fields at the Palmer River and beyond, and Georgetown settled into a much smaller, steadier existence as the administrative seat of the Etheridge Shire. Today, around 300 people live here, and this is where the real estate story actually gets interesting, because Georgetown residential blocks have recently listed for a little over $20,000, with mains water and power already available at the boundary. That's not a typo, and it's not an abandoned ruin either. It's a functioning town with a pub, a museum, a hospital, and a public pool, where land costs about what you'd pay for a decent second-hand car. The neighboring town of Cloncurry, further west, has even offered a $30,000 council incentive toward new home builds, on top of houses already listing under $200,000. This is what separates fantasy from fact in this niche. The genuinely cheap land in Outback Queensland isn't inside the ghost towns themselves. It's in the small, real, still-breathing towns sitting right next door to them. And speaking of towns that kept just enough people to survive, our next entry did exactly that, clinging to life through a labor dispute, a world war, and the loss of its own railway line. Number 4. Ravenswood. Gold was first found here in 1868 in the hills south of Charters Towers, and Ravenswood grew slowly but steadily over the following decades, despite ore that was notoriously difficult to process. Everything changed in the late 1890s when a Charters Towers entrepreneur named Archibald Wilson secured British financing and introduced a cyanide extraction process that finally cracked the town's stubborn ore. Ravenswood boomed. By 1902 and 1903, the town and its outlying camps supported a population that some estimates place as high as 15,000 people, with 29 hotels operating at once. Grand brick buildings went up: the Imperial Hotel, the Railway Hotel, an ambulance station, all built to last. They didn't get the chance to. A bitter labor dispute in 1912, followed by rising costs during the First World War, gutted the mining operation, and by 1917, it had collapsed entirely. In 1930, Ravenswood became the first town in Queensland history to lose its railway line altogether. By the 1960s and 70s, the population had fallen to around 70 people. A town of chimney stacks, cyanide vats, and empty poppet heads standing over what used to be a boom town of thousands. Ravenswood never fully disappeared, though. Modern open-cut gold mining resumed here in the 1980s and continues today, and the 2021 census recorded 297 residents. Heritage buildings carefully preserved alongside an active mine still pulling gold from the same ground. It's a strange kind of survival, a ghost town that got a second job. Our next entry offers no such second chance. It's remote enough that reaching it at all requires serious planning. And it was once the administrative capital of one of the harshest goldfields Australia has ever seen. Number 3, Maytown. In 1873, gold was found along the Palmer River in far north Queensland, and the rush that followed brought roughly 4,000 Europeans and as many as 10,000 Chinese miners into one of the most remote and physically brutal goldfields ever worked in this country. Maytown began as a rough bush camp known first as Butcher's Gully, then briefly as Edwardstown, before being formally surveyed in 1875 and named after the daughter of the surveyor who laid it out. By 1879, Maytown had become the administrative center of the entire Palmer Goldfield, and by 1876, it already supported 12 hotels, 6 stores, 3 bakers, and its own bank. This was not an easy place to live. Historians describe the Palmer as the most remote and hardest field ever worked by Australian gold diggers. And the arrival of European and Chinese miners triggered fierce, sustained conflict with the Aboriginal people whose land this had always been. A chapter of the goldfields' history that is as important as anything mined from the ground here. By 1900, Maytown's population had fallen to just 674 people. The last residents held on until sometime in the 1950s, after which the town was left to the bush entirely. Today, what remains is a scattering of stone curbing, an old baker's oven, rusting mining machinery, and a cemetery holding roughly 133 graves, only 19 of which still have identifiable headstones. Getting there requires a 4-wheel drive and real commitment, since no sealed road goes anywhere near it. Maytown sits entirely on protected land today, its ruins the last physical trace of a town that briefly governed one of the richest and cruelest goldfields in Australian history. If Maytown's story is about isolation, our next entry is about something far darker. A single morning that ended an entire town's reason for existing in less than a minute. Before we get to that, and to the town that closes out this list, we want to know something. Out of everything you've heard so far, which of these 10 places would you actually get in the car and drive out to see for yourself? Let us know in the comments, and if you haven't already, this is a good moment to subscribe, because we cover a new forgotten Australian town like this every single week. Number 2, Mount Mulligan. Coal mining began here in 1910 beneath a massive flat-topped sandstone massif in far north Queensland, known to the local Kuku-Jungan people as Ngarabulgan. The mine was considered exceptionally safe by the standard of its day. No dangerous gas had ever been detected in its shafts, which is exactly why the miners who worked there used naked open flames for light instead of the safety lamps required in gassier mines elsewhere. On the morning of September 19, 1921, at 25 minutes past 9, that assumption of safety proved fatal. A series of explosions tore through the mine, powerful enough to be heard 30 kilometers away. Every single miner underground at the time, 75 men in total, was killed instantly. There were no survivors. Only 11 of the 75 bodies were ever recovered. A royal commission later found that the explosion had been caused by an explosive charge detonated near a large block of fallen coal, which ignited the fine coal dust that had built up throughout the tunnels. A combination the mine's owners had never planned for because they'd never believed gas was the danger they needed to worry about. It remains the worst mining disaster in Queensland's history. In the aftermath, Queensland introduced sweeping new coal mining safety laws, mandating qualified mine inspectors, properly designed explosives, and safety lamps in place of open flames. Protections that came far too late for the men who died that morning. The mine reopened in 1923 and kept running until 1957, when a new hydroelectric scheme made its coal unnecessary. The town never really recovered. Today, Mount Mulligan is officially still a gazetted town, but it holds a single occupied residence, one cemetery, and one surviving chimney stack, standing beneath the same great sandstone mountain that watched the disaster unfold. It is one of the heaviest places on this list, and we tell its story here with the respect that 75 families deserve, not as spectacle, but as history that Queensland was forced to learn from the hardest way possible. And now, number 1, the town that doesn't just have ruins. It has almost nothing at all, because almost everything about it was sold. Mary Kathleen. In 1954, 2 prospectors, Norm McConaughey and Clem Walton, discovered a major uranium deposit in the remote northwest of Queensland, between the mining hub of Mount Isa and the smaller town of Cloncurry. McConaughey named the future town after his late wife, Mary Kathleen. Mining giant Rio Tinto acquired the rights, and in October 1958, Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies personally opened the new township 6 kilometers from the open-cut mine that would sustain it. For a while, Mary Kathleen was genuinely thriving, a modern purpose-built community with a school, a hospital, a cinema, and sporting facilities, housing as many as 1,200 residents at its peak in 1981. The mine closed once in 1963, reopened in 1974, and by 1982, the uranium deposit was finally exhausted for good. What happened next is what makes this story unlike anything else on this list. Rather than let the empty town simply decay, mining executives and local officials decided it wasn't financially practical to maintain it at all. In April 1983, Mary Kathleen went up for auction, and it was, by contemporary newspaper accounts, one of the largest auctions Australia had ever seen. Everything was for sale. The mining machinery, obviously, but also the houses themselves, the furniture inside them, the public buildings, the streetlights. Buyers descended on the town, according to one report, like ants swarming a honeypot. And over the following months, the town was dismantled brick by brick and physically carted away to Mount Isa and Cloncurry, less than an hour's drive in either direction. By the end of 1984, the last residents were gone. What followed was Australia's first major uranium mine rehabilitation project, completed in 1985 at a cost of $19 million, an effort that later won a National Engineering Award for environmental restoration. Today, there is nothing left to buy because there is nothing left standing. Visitors driving in on a four-wheel drive find empty concrete slabs where houses once stood, bitumen roads leading to foundations with no buildings on them, and a startlingly blue, faintly radioactive lake filling the old open-cut pit. Now something of an accidental tourist attraction. Mary Kathleen isn't just abandoned. It's the one town in Australia that was deliberately, systematically erased, sold off piece by piece, until the only thing left was the outline of where it used to be. 10 towns, 3 different endings. Some are locked away on protected land you can visit but never own. Some, like Georgetown and Ravenswood, held on just enough to still be real. Living places where land really can cost less than a car. And one, Mary Kathleen, didn't fade away at all. It was sold. Queensland's mining boom built these towns fast and tore them down just as fast, and what's left behind, whether it's a cemetery with 100 unmarked graves or a lake filling an old uranium pit, tells you more about how quickly fortune can turn in this country than any history textbook ever could. If one of these 10 surprised you, let us know which one in the comments below, and subscribe if you want to keep finding the places Australia left behind. We're back next week with 10 more.